I used to have a landscape construction business and kind of similar space. And, the first couple crews, up until like 3 crews, man, we were making money. It was awesome. Really fun times. Money was coming in and everyone was happy. And then, we ended up growing, pretty big. We had like 400 people by the end, but there was a middle time where we were growing for the sake of growing, and we were working harder than we ever had. And we weren't making money. Like it was really difficult making that switch.
No, I know. So what you just described is a very, very, very hard to explain, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And Josh, my business partner, I used to talk about there's this no man's land. Like you can have yourself and 10 guys and you can make a killing. From 10 guys to about 60 guys, it's the struggle bus. And then you cross another threshold to where you're back rolling again. And if you look at the history of companies, there's very few that live in that middleman space. It's either like you're small and efficient or you're big and you can pay for your mistakes. Is the best way I know to describe it. And we ramped up our business 2 or 3 times and we just kept getting stuck in that middleman zone. And, there was times we built, I think 12 or 15 houses a year, and our revenue was through the roof, but our profit margin was trash. And then the last couple of years, we kind of went back to basics and we built like 3 or 4 houses a year. Revenue was way down. Profit margin was way through the roof. The first thing you got to do is you got to be efficient what you do. And then it's easy just to keep adding people and equipment, but that don't mean you're scaling properly, because the bigger you get, the more layers you get. You know what I mean? Yeah. And as much as we'd like to have our finger on the pulse of everything, it's impossible. So you got to have procedures and stuff in place to kind of make decisions for you or let people know how you want those decisions to be made. And it's tough. I mean, I've got people that live in the 100 employee plus space, and I got a lot of people that live, down here in the 10 employee or less space. But that in between, man, it's no man's land. It really is.
Yeah, we found it's definitely one of those hurdles that you don't expect. You're clipping along. And you're like, why don't we add 2 more crews? We've got the business. We could use it. Maybe add a maintenance crew, get a 3rd one, onto the existing 3 or 4, and then you need a whole layer of management. You've now got people estimating. You've got doing bids and estimating. You've got 1 or 2 managers out there, and the vehicles. And what you don't really realize is, as soon as you're personally off the job sites, even with management, the production kind of, you lose a little bit of production.
So you end up with so much dead expenses. So like you said, you're off the job site, so you're no longer billable anymore, correct? Exactly. You put all these layers of management in there. They're no longer billable. They're a dead expense. Your production goes down because you're not present, so everything goes there. But what other people don't think about is, let's say I hired 5 framers. Well, if one framing crew is waiting on the electrician to get done, the next framing crew is waiting on weather, and the next guy's waiting on the foundation guy to get done. I got 3 framing crews that are sitting there piddling for 3 or 4 days now that I'm paying to keep busy because I can't lose them, right? Versus if I subcontract out the framer, he only gets paid if he shows up. So what we ended up learning, and I'm sure it's the same thing in the landscaping business, you're waiting for a supply to show up, or you're waiting for this job to get done for that piece of equipment. There's so much inefficient use of time that is so hard to manage, because whenever you got that many people, everybody's always waiting on something, which ends up being dead time, which ends up being a dead expense. I know there's people can argue with us all day long in the comments or however they want to about, well, but it's less for this, it's less for that. And then there is advantages to both ways, but what we found towards the end is having great relationship with subs was by far the most efficient way to run that. There's some stuff you got to do yourself, but know where your bread and butter is at. Our bread and butter was ICF work and excavation. So that's what we focused on hard. We made good relationships with subs on everything else instead of trying to do it all in-house. And that was our most successful go at it. But I got a question for you. How do you explain that to somebody? Because honestly, I tried to have it explained to me. I didn't understand it, but I've lived it, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm not sure that I could do it justice and, articulate it perfectly in the next, 30 seconds. But, when you're just talking about, how you could save some money, I think you're talking about economies of scale. And, to answer that, I think first of all, the answer to your question is a conversation probably, but the answer to that one specific comment, sure, there's economies of scale, but you still have expenses. So, $100,000 trucks, say you can buy them for 5% cheaper now, and they're $95,000. You still need 2 extra trucks that don't pay for themselves. You can't build them out. So that all comes right off the bottom line.
It's like I tell my wife, it's only a good deal if you need it.
Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately, with too much growth, you do need it. And then you really got to grow to be able to start paying for it and get into that profitable zone again, because the overhead just becomes way, way, way too high. I'm probably not articulating it well enough. But.
No, it's very difficult to do. Very difficult to do, and sometimes people just have to experience it. And if they come out the other end, they're going to be a lot better for it. But one of the most common questions I always get asked is, how do you get started in excavating business, or how do you do anything? And my comment is always walk before you run. Don't go jump out and get into a whole bunch of debt and get in over your head right off the bat. And then don't get too big for your britches. You know what I mean? Like, stay in your space, stay where you're comfortable, stay where you're efficient, stay where you're profitable, know your area. It's so tempting to go out and say, I got X, Y, and Z and look at me. And that is not me. It's just not me. If you guys look at my equipment, it's old, but it's reliable. It's profitable. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. When I started, I thought it was, I was buying great big Tonka trucks. I was pretty excited about owning all this stuff and real proud of it. And, the further I got in, the more I realized, I'm better to rent this stuff, have somebody else maintain it, send it back after the job, just get the right machine. It really doesn't matter. And I also got, into a little bit of a trap where I'm sure you've probably heard this before, where you start thinking that, you're building all this equity, but the equity's in the machines. Other than what's happened in the last few years with the supply chain challenges, you can't really have your equity sitting in a depreciating asset, right?
No, I mean, I've said for years, and it's not always right, I'm cash poor, asset rich, but my business partner used to always say, we'd have we'd have an asset sitting on the shelf. He said, that's fine, but I can't go to the store and buy milk with it. Well, good is it to me? Exactly. The cash is the best asset, right? Because it's liquid. You can do whatever you want to with it whenever you need. But if you're going to have a bunch of assets, you can't have a bunch of debt to go with it. That's the important part. That's the important part of that. Everybody wants to talk about these $1 million worth of machines they own, but they don't tell you about the 999,000 they got borrowed on it. If you own $1 million worth of machines,
$1.2 million,
right? Or they're upside down on it. But if you own $1 million worth of machines and you only owe $100,000 on them, well, that's a little bit of a different. That gives you a lot more options.